All right. Welcome everyone that's in here right now. Good morning to you both. And go here. Download this. Okay. That's set to go. We'll get started in a couple of minutes here in case you're wondering. But I'm just like updating stuff on Schoology right now for the new lesson for today. We have 9 people in here. Oh. Morning, Elijah. Thank you for joining us. Remember, folks, that I am on a little bit of a delay, so if you type things to me, I may not respond right away. Copy that, and then we gotta bring this over here. Live lecture. Alrighty. And then I think we should be good to go. All right, well, it might just be a classroom of 9 today. It appears that people chose to use their Friday today to sleep in, which is fine. I get it. But thank you for joining. And, you know, this will be the 3rd time this week that we've done a lesson. I rather have enjoyed waking up and having something to do on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So I appreciate that you guys are still watching. Hopefully we'll get a few more viewers as time rolls on here. If not, that's okay too. Maybe people will watch it later. I guess that's always an opportunity to do that. I think before we get started here, I'm going to run down and fill up my cup of coffee so I have some more coffee. And so I'll run and do that really quickly. If you guys wanted to go ahead and go to, as I'm doing that, go to Schoology, open up Schoology, go to the Files and Links folder, and then if you want, download the Reformation PDF from the folder. There's a gray folder inside the Files and Links folder that says Old PowerPoints or something like that. And you're going to open up the one on, it's a PDF file on the Protestant Reformation. Get that going, and I'll be right back. And hey, look at this. A wild mochi has appeared. Mochi, you're so cute. How come you're so cute? It's baby Mochi. It's baby Mochi, huh? Okay, here you go. So, very good. I know, I love Baby Mochi. He's so cute. He's such a little sweetheart. He has 2 modes, running 100 miles an hour all night or sleeping. That's his 2 modes. He's either going a million miles an hour or sleeping. All right. So yeah, now we got 12 people. That's nice. Okay, so we're going to be going over some things here relating to Protestant Reformation. There he is. He's already causing trouble back here. Look, he's torturing Harrison. Anyway. All right. We are going to get started talking about Protestant Reformation right now, and I'm going to switch over to my desktop so you guys can see some of the stuff that I'm going to go over. I'm going to start today with the course exam description curriculum stuff, and then we'll get more in depth as we progress throughout today's lesson. So let me swap this over here. And I'm going to scroll down here to the section. Now this link is available for you to this PDF on the Schoology new folder that I created, the purple folder. And I wanted to take some time today to talk about some of the course guidelines that they mention in this. And then from this, we'll jump over to another review tool. But I got to scroll down and find where we are at. Okay, Age of Reformation. Who knows? Maybe the exam will be on the Reformation. Never know. So, taking a look at this unit. Let's scroll down to here. All right, so contextualizing 16th and 17th century challenges and developments in the Age of Reformation. It says, let's see here. So religious pluralism. Okay. One of the things that we start to see happen with the Protestant Reformation is that it's no longer the Catholic Church is no longer the sole religious entity in Europe. Okay, you have religious pluralism now, and what religious pluralism is that you've got these competing ideologies, these competing religions between Protestantism and Catholicism, and these institutions. Like the Catholic Church, for example, the Catholic Church loses some of its prestige during this time because if they're the only religious entity in Europe, then they have an incredible amount of control and power over the European person, their intellect, society at large, and so on. Religious pluralism challenges that notion because we start to see a divide between northern states of Europe and southern states of Europe, where northern states tend to be more Protestant and break away from the Catholic Church, and the southern European states tend to be more Catholic and remain largely under the influence of the Roman Catholic Church. And so religious pluralism becomes a major feature of this time. Obviously, there are a lot of religious wars that are fought as a result of the religious pluralism in Europe after the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant and Catholic Reformations fundamentally changed theology, religious institutions, culture, and attitudes towards wealth and prosperity. Religious reform both increased control of religious institutions and provided justifications for challenging state authority. And here's the other thing that's interesting about this that we're seeing at this time is due to the religious pluralism, it actually opens the door for those new monarchs that we were talking about on Wednesday, guys like Henry Tudor, actually more so his son, Henry VIII. But it allows for these monarchs to increasingly challenge the church, and then the church feels justified in challenging state authority as well because of the Reformation. And so conflicts among religious groups overlap with political and economic competition within and among states. And we've talked about several examples of that. We talked about Peasants Revolts, for example. We talked about the Pilgrimage of Grace in England, where people were upset with the king for closing down the monasteries, and but they were also upset for other problems as well, political and economic problems. European society and the experiences of everyday life were increasingly shaped by commercial and agricultural capitalism during this time. But we do see some various medieval social economic structures like mercantilism still in play in Europe for sure. And mercantilism is going to stick around for a good long time, all the way up through the 18th century, really. And we see some population shifts and things like that. Luther, some of the new ideas from this time, Protestant interpretations of Christian doctrine. One of the things that Luther really believed in was this priesthood of all believers. He thought that everyone was spiritually equal. Just because you had a title like cardinal or pope or pastor or whatever didn't mean that you were closer to God than anyone else, according to Luther. Primacy of Scripture, what that's referring to is that the Scripture is the last word. Basically, remember, one of Luther's big ideas is that the Bible should be interpreted quite literally. He has a very strict idea of how the Bible should be interpreted. Predestination is a feature of both Luther's. Luther believed in predestination, but not to the same level that John Calvin did, and it ends up being a point of difference between Lutheranism and Calvinism. But predestination is the idea that if God already knows before you've been born whether or not you're going to heaven or hell, and this was a primary feature of Calvinist belief, not so much Lutheran belief. Salvation by faith alone. Basically, the Catholic Church used to support the idea of good works, and that one way in which you could get to heaven was to do good works, and good works were supposed to be demonstrative of your faith. But they say in the Protestant faiths, remember the root word of Protestant is protest, so they're protesting against the Catholic Church. And one of the things that they said in the Protestant faiths is, you can't. The only thing that will save you is your faith. Just because you do a bunch of good works to show off to all your neighbors or whatever, or good works in lieu of a bunch of bad other works, that's not true belief. And so they said that you can't do good works to get into heaven. Now, a person who is a true believer will probably do good works. That's their philosophy on it. It's not saying that people shouldn't do good works. It's saying that just doing good works alone isn't enough to get you into heaven. And they also, Protestants who viewed wealth as signs of God's favor, Calvinists. Remember that Protestant work ethic is another major feature of Protestantism. It's another major feature of actually American society as well, because America was largely founded by Protestants. And so these Calvinists believed that God rewards people who, work hard, and that God's sign, it's a sign from God that He is favoring you if you are being rewarded for that hard work. So that's Protestant work ethic. Right down here. Wealth accumulation was a sign of God's favor and a reward for hard work. So Protestant work ethic is another major feature of Calvinism and Protestantism in general. Down here, Protestant Reform continues. Explain how and why religious belief and practices changed from 1450 to 1648. Protestant reformers used the printing press to disseminate their ideas, which spurred religious reform and helped it become widely established. Particularly, remember that those printing presses were established in Germany, and that is also where Lutheranism and other Protestant faiths are founded as well. Religious conflicts became a basis for challenging the monarch's control of religious institutions. Increasingly after this time, we start to see that there is a push for, just in general, you see a lot of, in the 15 and 1600s, a lot of state control of faith, right? So the king of a place determines if that place is going to be Catholic or Protestant. That happens in England. It happens in France. It happens in the Holy Roman Empire and various other places as well. And the idea being that increasingly you see religion fall under state authority. It becomes subordinate to the state. We actually, I don't know if you remember this, but we actually had an SAQ about this earlier on this year about asking about explain ways in which the state was able to centralize its authority. And one of the ways that we talked about in class was subordinating religious institutions to the state. So when King Henry VIII, for example, creates the Church of England, what he is doing, he's, first of all, he's of course rejecting the Catholic faith, but also he is establishing himself as the head of the Protestant faith within England, the Anglican Church. And so this is yet another example of that. Now, a lot of them may have been even Catholic, right? So you have like Holy Roman Emperor, Ferdinand of the Holy Roman Empire. Ferdinand largely responsible, I think it was Ferdinand II, largely responsible for kind of the initiation of the 30 Years' War, the whole incident with the defenestration of Prague and stuff like that. He's a Catholic monarch, and so he's trying to institute Catholic uniformity. And it's really difficult in an age of religious pluralism to institute uniformity, because not everybody, particularly in the lands of the Holy Roman Empire, not everybody is going to see eye to eye on religious issues. Some of those places could be very Catholic, and then right next door another place could be really, really Protestant. And so to get those people to look past their religious differences in this time is going to be increasingly difficult. Reformers using the press to disseminate their ideas included Martin Luther. Remember, too, you got vernacular Bibles that are being printed. Remember that previously, under the Catholic Church, the only language that they could print the Bible in was Latin, and most people couldn't read Latin or understand it. It was a dead language even then. And so they started to print the Bible in local vernacular languages. This would include English or German or Italian or what. And this, of course, helps to increase literacy as well. Religious conflicts caused by groups challenging the monarch's control. You got Huguenots in France. The Huguenots were a huge problem for the Catholic, primarily Catholic French. And, they undergo terrible persecution, the Huguenots in France. Examples of that would include, like, for example, St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre of 1572, I think it is. And then you have the Puritans in England who literally leave. You might remember the story of the Pilgrims coming over. The Puritans, due to religious persecution in the early days of the 1600s, say 1600s, 1610s, of England, were seen as religious extremists, and so to pursue religious freedom, they left England and settled over in an area that they technically weren't allowed to settle. They were technically squatting in it, but that's how the Pilgrims end up over at Plymouth Rock. And then the nobles in Poland, of course, have their own issues. The Poland, as you know, is a troubled area in European history. And one of the problems that you have with the nobles in Poland is that in order for anything to happen in Poland, one of the places where centralization really doesn't take place, one of the reasons that Poland is so weak is because the nobles in Poland have a tremendous amount of authority locally and regionally, and this prevents the king of Poland from being able to really crack down on the nobles. And it also means that changes in Poland are going to be very difficult to secure, because in order for any changes to take place in Poland, they had this rule about it had to be a unanimous decision amongst all high nobles in Poland. And this is a problem that is going to cause Poland to be comparatively quite weak in the face of other centralized states who have more absolutist style monarchies, as opposed to nobles who are able to chip away at the authority of the church. At the authority of the king. Okay, moving forward here, wars of religion. Obviously, one of the big aspects of the Protestant Reformation unit is going to be all the wars of religion, right? So the last war of religion is one that you guys should all be pretty familiar with, the 30 Years' War. That's the one that rounds out 1648 and the first period of the whole class. But key factors at this time, you have the War of the Three Henrys in France. That was between Henry Duke of Guise, and then you had Henry of Navarre, and the third Henry, which was the King of France at the time, and so then you have Henry the Fourth. All right, Henry the Fourth is Henry of Navarre. He's Henry the Good King. He's the one who kind of comes out on top in the War of the Three Henrys. He reluctantly becomes king. He's the guy, if you remember, he's a politique. He's the guy who switches back and forth between Catholicism and Protestantism a bunch of times. He's a Huguenot, then he's a Catholic, then he's a Huguenot again, then he's a Catholic again. He kind of goes whichever ways the wind blows, and he's not super concerned with religion. He's also the guy that gets assassinated when he's in traffic in France and he gets stabbed to death, in case you forgot that story. St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, we mentioned. Catherine de' Medici of France was another major figure at this time. Habsburg rulers included Charles V. Remember, Charles V is the Holy Roman Emperor during the Protestant Reformation. He's the guy who basically says that this is way too much for one person to handle. I'm going to split up the domain of my ruling and give it to my two sons. And he splits it into Spanish Habsburgs and Austrian Habsburgs between his two sons. Then you have state exploitation of religious conflicts between Catholic Spain and Protestant England, where you had, for example, the Spanish Armada. During this time, the English hadn't set up a colony yet in the 1500s, but the Spanish had already set up several colonies over in the New World and were extracting a bunch of silver, and the English were coming and stealing their ship silver and or the silver off their ships and bringing it back. And Philip II, who was the king of Spain at that time, he got angry and realized Elizabeth was kind of playing him. Philip II famously, too, was previously married to Queen Mary I, the Catholic queen, the last Catholic queen of England. And there's the Spanish Armada is when Spain decides to attack England, but with all of their Spanish silver that they had stolen, England had used that silver to create a navy, and Elizabeth I utilized the English Royal Navy to defeat the Spanish. France, Sweden, and Denmark all had phases within the 30 Years' War. There was the Danish phase, the Swedish phase, and then the French phase of war. Remember that as the 30 Years' War goes on, it becomes less and less about religious pluralism and more about political, dynastical types of conflicts. The states that did allow religious pluralism were going to be Poland and the Netherlands. The Dutch Republic tends to be, I won't say tolerant, okay, that's maybe pushing it a little bit, but they are at least maybe a little bit more accepting of religious pluralism than, say, a place like, I don't know, Italy or something, Italy's not unified at this point, but Italy's going to be largely Catholic and not very tolerant of other places, Spain too. All right. Okay, so issues of religious reform. Okay, a few states such as France with the Edict of Nantes allowed religious pluralism for a while, but the Edict of Nantes famously, if you remember, gets revoked by Louis XIV with something called the Edict of Fontainebleau. And so the Edict of Nantes after Henry IV had, Henry IV is the one who enacted the Edict of Nantes. And so for a while, Huguenots are like treated okay in France, or at least minimally like tolerated. But then, one king, one law, one faith was the moniker of Louis XIV, who's like considered, of course, the preeminent absolutist king of France. And so he decides, okay, we got to have one faith and we're going to revoke the Edict of Nantes. Catholic Reformation, there's a Counter-Reformation. This is where we see like women's nuns school of St. Teresa of Avila, the Ursuline nuns. There's a Roman Inquisition where basically the Catholic Church takes a look at all their practices and says, okay, are we doing things right? And then they're like, okay, yeah, we're all doing things good. We're also going to create an index of prohibited books at this time, which would include all of the texts written by Protestant folks, or any texts really that the index of prohibited books were any texts that the church ultimately found undermined its religious, social, and intellectual hegemony over the populations of Europe. And so it could have been anything to deal with Copernican view. It could have been anything to do with Galileo finds himself on the list of prohibited books down the line, and so on and so forth. So because the way that education spreads is through literacy, right? And so the Catholic Church has a vested interest in not allowing certain ideas to spread that could undermine its authority in the long run, and that's why they create the list of prohibited books. The Catholic Reformation most famously was exhibited by the Council of Trent, was what that was called. The Council of Trent was where they all got together and looked over their practices and then decided at the end, like, yep, turns out we're doing everything good. And it revived the church because you have the Jesuit order, which follows. There's with the Jesuits were the like militant branch of the Catholic Church during the Counter-Reformation, where during the Catholic Counter-Reformation, the Jesuits were trying to essentially radically rein in the likelihood that people were going to convert to other faiths and go and militantly try to convert people to the Catholic faith. 16th century society and politics, couple of things to keep in mind about this. It says economic, political, and cultural factors have influenced the form and status of family, class, social groups in European history. That's the big theme. Let's look at historical developments within this time. We see established hierarchies of class, religion, and gender continued to define social status and perceptions in rural and urban settings. Remember that socially, Europe at this time is going to be largely agrarian. It's way before the Industrial Revolution at this point, so most people live on farms. Europe's population is still comparatively quite small compared to what it would become down the line. Rural and urban households worked as units with men and women engaged in separate but complementary tasks in a lot of cases. That's what we call that family economy, where a lot of places in Europe, the women played an integral part of the family business and doing certain things. But over time, we do see in urban areas, women's roles begin to change, particularly in the upper class. The Renaissance and Reformation raised debates about female education and women's roles in the family, church, and society. Social dislocation. Oh, by the way, something interesting about that. How did Protestants fare how did females fare under Protestantism? You might think that Protestantism, because it called for a priesthood of all believers, meaning that everybody was spiritually equal, that this would somehow elevate women's status in society. But oddly enough, because the Protestant Reformation is an oddly conservative movement, it's a movement that's trying to bring back the old traditions of the Catholic Church, right? The church that had been long gone for a while, since the Catholic Church had kind of gone down this path of being a little bit more loosey-goosey, a little bit more frivolent in its depiction of the Bible and rules of the church, and then also their behaviors had become quite corrupt and questionable. And so the Protestant Reformation, when they're trying to reform the church, they're trying to bring it back to when the church was a more sanctified, honest, but also more strict institution. And so women's roles in Protestantism actually probably diminish because there's actually fewer roles for women in Protestantism in the early days outside of raising the family to be good believers. Now there is another side of this, which says that, Martin Luther advocated for a loving marriage where, they had ideas surrounding love and intimacy that were different than the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church more or less thought that a husband and wife's having children and stuff like that was purely for the sake of having children. Where Martin Luther argued that relationships between men and women were to be enjoyed, and that a husband and wife should love each other and be intimate and so on. And so there is a little bit of maybe, I guess, companionate love that we see emerge with Protestantism as opposed to under Catholicism, where a lot of marriages had typically been arranged, and that, I don't know. I think that it's splitting hairs a little bit, but anyway, social dislocation coupled with the shifting authority of religious institutions during the Reformation left city governments with the task of regulating public morals. We had a question about regulating public morals on a test where city governments was the answer. I don't know if you remember that question or not, but regulating public morals, right? It's city governments that start to do that with police forces and so on, where previously it would have been the church who probably regulated public morals. Leisure activities continued to be organized according to the religious calendar, and the agricultural cycle remained and the agricultural cycle and remained communal in nature. So there would be these public fetes, festivals, okay, that people would congregate and have local festivals in their community pertaining to, say, the harvest, or pertaining to religious holidays on the calendar, the Easter tables in their local church. And so this would have been what dictated local festivals. There were rituals of public humiliation that people used at this time that could have been throwing people in the stockade, or all sorts of different kind of crazy things. Local church authorities continued to enforce cultural norms through rituals of public humiliation. It could have been that they threw rotten fruit at you. They could have tarred and feathered you. There's all sorts of different things. And then, of course, don't forget that the religious pluralism of this time results in the peak of witch accusations happening between 1580 and 1650. So there's a lot of alleged witchcraft, quote unquote, going on at this time as a result of trying to regulate social behaviors through accusing people, particularly though like middle-aged women who were typically a lot of times widows and so on, and they would be accused of witchcraft and then probably sentenced to do some sort of horrible thing like jump off a cliff, or be thrown into a river and tied to a boulder or whatever, and things like that. Plus, too, of course, all of the other crazy stuff that happens during the witch trials, where they're tortured and forced to call out other people and other things like that. It's a really kind of confusing and horrible time. But it just goes to show you that even in the midst of the scientific revolution that was going on right along the same time as this, in small towns across Europe and even in North America, where we see the Salem witch trials and stuff, that there's a lot of superstition, and it goes to show the degree to which religion and mysticism still captured the hearts and minds of the people of Europe at that time. Art-wise, we see a transition from the art of the High Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, where we see artists like Michelangelo and Raphael and so on, and we see a transition into the Mannerist style. Most likely the biggest name in the Mannerist style that you would ever be asked about is El Greco, who was a Spanish artist at the time. The Mannerist style tends to be a little bit more emotionally exaggerated. Also, you see some features where the facial features and so on tend to be a little bit elongated. So it's not quite as proportional as the High Renaissance was. It's a little bit more exaggerated in its flavor. And then the Baroque style. And the Baroque style really is a product of high upper echelons of society, the upper echelons of the Catholic Church in particular, and also monarchs. Now remember, a lot of absolute monarchs at this time believe in the notion of divine right, which means that they derive their power from God. And so when we think about conservative forces in Europe in the 15 and 1600s, we should be thinking about the fact that at the top of society you have the kings and high nobles, who are largely going to be Catholic, at least in the absolutist states. Less so the further north that you get. So the King of England isn't Catholic anymore. but a lot of kings remain Catholic. The French king is Catholic. The Spanish kings are Catholic. The Austrian kings are Catholic, and so on and so on. And so there's a natural tie to be drawn between Catholicism and the monarch. They're largely on the same side as one another. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because Baroque art is very representative of both. Baroque art is a very grandiose style of art, very expensive, very heavy, very royal. The only places you would have seen Baroque art manifest would be in cathedrals or in palaces across Europe. Think really heavy, gilded, ornate, expensive-looking art with heavy colors, as opposed to Rococo art, which is also very, very ornate, but has a lighter, daintier feel to it. So with Baroque art, which is also sometimes considered the art of the Counter-Reformation, think again, it's associated with the church. You have to have money to commission art, and the people who have money at this time are going to be the Catholic Church and your monarchs and high nobles. So it stands to reason that this art would be representative of that echelon of society. But Baroque colors are going to be things like reds and purples and golds and royal blues and heavier colors. All right, lots of gold though. Whereas Rococo style art is going to more be like your instead of gold, it might be white marble. It'll be every bit as decorated and as ornate, but it'll be lighter feeling because it'll be different colors. And it's not going to be your heavy colors. It's going to be colors that are more pastels, like blue, light blues and pinks and yellows and things like that. So that's going to be more the Rococo style, which comes later on down the line. Okay, I want to jump over for this slide here, or for this page where it says causation in the age of Reformation and rewards of religion. We're going to jump over, and I just wanted to review a few different slides from the PowerPoint that I used in class. Actually, you know what? Before I do that, let me do this really quickly. Jump over here to Schoology. Did I copy this over to the other classes? I bet I did not. Let me double check that really quick. I did not. So let me copy this over right now. Copy this to do that. Okay. So that should be good. Now we can go over to, I should check if I have any. Poor Poland. Yes, poor Poland indeed. Okay, and then, how many people are watching right now? 10? All right, I'll take it. All right, close that. What I wanted to do was bring this back up again. In case you didn't know, you can go to Schoology, and on there in the main folder, there's this green folder here that says Review Materials. You can click on that and click up here at the chapter review guides. Let's just take a look again at the one that we looked at on Wednesday for the Renaissance, but this time focus on the Reformation aspect of it. So we'll open this up. This is all available to you on Schoology. And we'll just scroll down here and take a look at some of these things here. Okay, church criticisms. This also is actually exemplified in this PowerPoint right here. So I'll pop this up over on the other side. When we talk about causes of the Reformation, this is good stuff to know. I mean, this is really probably one of the best, introductory slides here. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this so we can see these a little bit better. Let's do this. Come on. All right. Maybe that's a little bit better. do that. Okay. So why? Why is the church... Why does the Protestant Reformation happen at all in the first place? Well, I thought that it would be a good idea to take some time to review some of the major causes of the Reformation. Now, if you don't remember some of this stuff, that's okay. That's why we're going over it right now. One major cause in the early days of a drop in the prestige of the church is that you have this period of time in the late Middle Ages known as the Avignon Papacy and the Great Schism. Now, you won't be asked questions about those because you'll note that these fall in the 1300s, okay? They fall in the 1300s. You will not be asked anything on the test after 1450, okay? So, but this is good stuff to know as background information as to why the church started to lose some of its prestige in the first place. Is because you already were seeing a split in church authority where some of the... leadership was in France, some of the leadership was in Rome. You have a pope and an anti-pope at that time, and lots of people may not have even known that it was going on, that there was this huge schism in the church, but there are some crises that the church is facing at the top of the institution at that time in the late Middle Ages. They end up resulting in the conciliar movement, which was to reform the church and give the church council more power than the pope, and that gets rejected by several popes in the 15th and 16th century. And then, of course, you had the Renaissance papacy, and during the Renaissance papacy, you have like the warrior pope, right? Warrior pope was like, who was it? Julius the Second or something like that, I think it was. Who was the warrior pope? Let me double check that. Or was it Leo the 10th? Warrior pope. Yeah, Julius II. I was right. Sometimes I surprise even myself. So the warrior Pope Julius II got involved in those French wars with Italy, or the Italian states at the time. And so, and then you have Leo X, who was another prominent pope during the Protestant Reformation. And so, you know, French invasions, etc. These sorts of things had made the Pope... The Pope is supposed to be a spiritual figure, but he was very, very much a political figure at this time as well. Because remember, the Pope is also the head of the Papal States, which is itself an independent and sovereign state. Causes of the Reformation: corruption in the Catholic Church. Lots of corruption. So when we talk about causes of the all of this is causes of the Reformation. But when we talk about causes pertaining directly to church behaviors, simony. The sale of church offices to the highest bidder. Whoever was the wealthiest could buy their office in the church, and this could be very, very profitable to them. And so, Mochi, what are you doing? Will you get down, please? You're going to tip my speaker over. You're causing trouble. You know, you're playing with the... Mochi's playing with the drawstrings of the blinds. But he's sitting on my speaker, and I'm pretty sure he's fixing to knock it over right now. Anyway, what are you doing? What are you doing? Get down. All right, sorry. Pluralism, holding more than one office at a time. So that'd be like having several positions within the Roman Catholic Church and getting paid for all of them. And then absenteeism, which is basically like an official who's not participating in benefices but receiving payment and privileges as though they were. So in other words, they may not even hold an actual title, but they're still being paid as though they are holding a title. The sale of indulgences is without question the biggest cause of the the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther could not find any scripture in the Bible, and remember, he's big on interpreting scripture as it's written on the page. He could not find any scripture that allows for the Catholic Church to sell indulgences to absolve people of their sins. Now, why did indulgences start to get sold in the first place? Well, you might remember that one of the reasons that indulgences start to be sold has a lot to do with the Black Death. Okay, let me switch this over here so we can see. All right, so the Black Death had killed a whole bunch of people in Europe, And when people were dying so unexpectedly, and you have all these folks who get sick and they fall ill, and within a week or two, they're dead. In that time, one of the big things that people had to do before they died, or wanted to do before they died, was to be absolved of their sins. So what do you do when grandma dies unexpectedly and she hasn't had a chance to meet with her priest? Well, according to the Catholic Church at that time, you could buy these get out of hell free cards called indulgences. Now, of course, you have to pay for these. So already you're going to be in a tough spot if you don't have the money to buy them. Sorry, maybe you'll spend some time in purgatory. And that is the thing that that really advances the sale of these indulgences. The concept of purgatory widens greatly in the 1500s, 14 and 1500s, thanks to the Black Plague hitting and killing all these folks. And people started to need an explanation for, well, what happens when these people who were otherwise good folks didn't have a chance to meet with their priest for their last rites. And so the idea of purgatory widely expands during this time, where it's like the waiting room to either heaven or hell. And maybe grandma has to spend 100 or 1,000 or however many years in purgatory before she moves on to heaven. And so one way that you could fast forward through that would be to purchase indulgences of the church and say, well, I bought my get out of purgatory free card, and now I can advance my journey to heaven more quickly. Well, Martin Luther doesn't like this. Okay, Martin Luther thinks that this is extremely corrupt, because it is. And they were using the money from these indulgences to pay for St. Peter's Basilica, which is now where the Vatican is. It's always been where the Vatican is, but the Vatican is St. Peter's Basilica. We talked about it on Wednesday. It's the one that has the triangular pediment. It almost looks more like our governmental buildings than it does a church, because it's got all of the same features of neoclassicism, where it's got pillars and a triangular pediment and a dome and other things like that. It looks almost like the White House or something, or a Capitol building, but it's a church. And it was made during the Renaissance. And so anyhow, they're using the sale of indulgences to pay for this thing, because it's, of course, and for a bunch of art, obviously, because that's where the Sistine Chapel is and all that stuff too. So they were paying guys like Michelangelo and so on to do all this stuff with the money that they were making from indulgences. All right, let's switch over here back to the screen. Nepotism is another thing. You probably have heard of nepotism before. This is where you basically give people within your own family church offices. We still see nepotism happen all the time. Even in modern day times, the president has put given positions to people within his own family, like his son-in-law and his daughter and so on. So it happens. Nepotism is pretty common. Corruption within the church, moral decline of the papacy. Alexander VI, the Borgia Pope, as he was sometimes referred to. The Borgia Pope was during the kind of early Renaissance years, but Pope Alexander VI was his name. But he was like a really corrupt dude. He had numerous affairs, numerous kids out of wedlock, not very priestly, and so probably not a very holy choice for a pope. Clerical ignorance. Another thing is that they're putting people in these positions of power who are wealthy but were virtually illiterate. They may not have known much about the church or about scripture at all. And so it's an institution that has found itself a far stretch away from what it used to be, and this is why one of the reasons that the Protestant Reformation happened in the first place. You do see some people in the early days questioning the church, but of course Erasmus is a major feature of that. In Praise of Folly, in other words, in Praise of Foolishness. This is a book. It's like a satirical piece where he is talking about all of the things in society that people value that are so stupid and foolish. And a lot of people say that that Erasmus laid the egg that Luther hatched, because Erasmus said that the church was so corrupt it needed to be reformed. But Erasmus disagreed with Luther about breaking away from the church. He thought that reform needed to happen from the top down and from within, not that new faiths needed to be created to compete with the church. And this is where their split was. So Erasmus may have had all of the same grievances that Luther had, but their solution ideas were different. Again, true religion, a matter of inward sincerity, pious devotion, and things like that, priesthood of all believers. All of their ideas were very similar to one another. Northern humanism we talked about last time. Zwingli was another major reform figure of the church. John Calvin, another. Here's Luther. Indulgences, we talked about that. Johann Tetzel was the priest in Germany, in Saxony, that Luther did not like very much. And here he has his hand on the coffer, which is a small chest where you put coins and other valuables. And his famous quote was, "As soon as a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs." So, and here's Martin Luther's 95 Theses, the doors of Wittenberg Cathedral right here. Whether he actually nailed the theses is of debate, but we say that he did. Luther challenges the church authority, defends various other people who had been excommunicated, and Luther's theology listed here in the PowerPoint. Lots of excellent information there for you. The Diet of Berms, remember, was the trial where Luther was, asked whether or not he would recant what he said, whether he would take back what he said, and he said his response is, "Here I stand, I can do no other." Here he is throwing the papal bull onto the fire. He's doing a bull drop, like a mic drop, but with a papal bull right onto this fire of his papers of excommunication. At the Diet of Worms, Luther escapes, and he is given kidnapped, I guess, quote unquote, by agents of Frederick III, but he is given protection by Frederick III for the rest of his life, where he was able to continue to write and do other things. The Peasants War of this time, German Peasants War. Remember that there was a giant Peasants Revolt who tried to use Luther's ideas about questioning the church to question their own status in society, but Luther tries to distance himself from them, and the uprising is put down. As many as 100,000 peasants died during this uprising that both Catholic and Lutheran forces took part in squashing, because the Luther says this is an unchristian revolt, because Luther was an educated man. He was already towards the top of society. He was a monk. He was a literate man, and he was very knowledgeable about what he was talking about when it came to the Bible. So he's something of an expert, and he's questioning the church, which is the thing that he's an expert in. When people start to question the structure of society, however, in secular affairs, this is a bridge too far for Luther, and he's not going to be in favor of that. So he tries to distance himself from the German Peasants' Revolt, and it's why both Catholics and Lutherans take part in squashing it, is because now that's a bridge too far. Neither the Catholics or the Lutherans want a revolt. Think of it almost kind of like the Democrats and the Republicans would get along very, very well if they sensed that the vast majority of people in America were starting to question the role of American society and question the role of government. Magically, what would happen is the Democrats and the Republicans would get over all of their grievances to preserve the institution that gave them their power in the first place, and that's what happens with Catholics and Lutherans during this Peasants' Revolt. All right, the League of Schmalkalden was another major feature of this time. This was formed to defend people against Charles V's drive to re-Catholicize Germany. Francis I of France allied with the League despite being Catholic, which is really funny because the League of Schmalkalden was mostly Protestants, Protestant princes, but the French join it just because they hate the Habsburgs so much. And so, which is classic France to do something like that. They do that several times throughout history. The Habsburg-Valois Wars, I talked about these a little bit last time, but these were the wars between France and the Habsburgs over Italy. They're kind of an extension to some degree of the French-Italian wars of the Renaissance period. All of this ends up resulting in the Peace of Augsburg of 1555, and this is a temporary end to the struggle in the Holy Roman Empire over Lutheranism, were all of these different principalities within the Holy Roman Empire, of which there were at this time hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, were fighting over one another over which was the true faith. And the Peace of Augsburg puts a temporary halt to that, where it says that it's the cuius regio eius religio. And I know I'm butchering that because I don't speak Latin, but who's the religion, who's the region, his the religion. In other words, whatever the faith of the king or bishop or whatever of a particular place in the Holy Roman Empire was, so the rest of the region would be that same religion. And if you weren't living in, let's say you were a Protestant and your prince was Catholic, you were then at that time allowed to relocate to a nearby province where a Protestant king was, and vice versa. All right, spread of Protestantism. We see the Anabaptists. They're another major feature of this. The tragedy at Munster was when basically Catholic and Protestant forces went in, and once again, it's kind of like a bridge too far. The Anabaptists were considered super, super, super radical for their time, almost creating like a communistic type, like polygamy, weird thing going on. Anyway, the Catholics and Protestants are like, these guys are way out there. They're just practicing some really, really far-fetched religion at this time, and we need to put an end to that. So the Anabaptists get, it's a massacre basically, and the Anabaptists thereafter start to be known as Mennonites, and then eventually as Quakers and things like that. The Quakers being more prominent in American history than they are in European history. Ulrich Zwingli, who was part of the Swiss Reformation, I mentioned his name a little bit earlier, he and Luther got along for a while until the Marburg Colloquy. And the Marburg right down here, Colloquy of Marburg, 1529, Zwingli officially split with Luther over the Eucharist issue. Remember that there was a huge thing with the Catholic Church of something called transubstantiation, where they perform. There was a ceremony in the Catholic Church where they perform to turn bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ for consumption during the Eucharist by the believers. And Luther believed in something called consubstantiation, which is that the blood and the bread and wine don't actually physically transform into the body and blood of Christ, but instead simply have the presence of Christ's Spirit infused in the bread and the wine. Now, of course, to the ignorant observer of both practices, they would look the same, but the principle behind it was different, and that's what they split on. So Zwingli and Luther cannot come to common ground on this Eucharist issue, the body and blood issue of communion during Mass. All right, spread of Protestantism. Calvinism, it ends up becoming a much bigger name than Luther in the long run, because Calvinism manifests in all sorts of different places, from Switzerland to the Dutch Reformed Church, which are the Dutch Protestants who wear the black clothing with the wide-brimmed hats. And then you've got the Puritans up in England. You've got the Huguenots down in France. You've got the Presbyterians up in Scotland, and so on and so forth. So Calvinism becomes far more widespread. It's also a bit more radical than Lutheranism was. Lutheranism remains largely in northern Germany and in Sweden as well, Denmark to some extent. Calvinism institutes this idea of predestination. The elect were these church members who had their conversion experience, and they were visible saints. Calvinism established a theocracy in Geneva by 1540. John Calvin believed church and city should combine to enforce Christian behavior. He did not believe in separation of church and state. He believed in integration of church and state, that the church should be that the state should be a function of the church, all right, or that that laws should be based on religious scripture. And so, which is of course very different from what we believe here in the United States. We strongly believe in a separation of church and state here in the United States. So that probably sounds a little weird, but they want to base their laws on faith. which means that it's not going to be a very tolerant society, which is true of most Huguenot society, or Calvinist societies. They're not very tolerant of other people. Like when the Puritans established their what's the word that I'm looking for? Towns, colonies, whatever, here in North America. Like, for example, Massachusetts Bay Colony was founded by Puritans. They are going to be some of the least tolerant of other folks' religions here in the New World. Calvinism spreads. It has a far greater impact than Lutheranism, which I mentioned. Like I said, Presbyterianism was established in Scotland by John Knox, the Dutch Reformed Church in the Dutch Republic. You see the Huguenots in France, the Puritans in England, so they're kind of all over the place. How come the Protestant Reformation doesn't spread to Italy? Well, number one, the Catholic Church is centered in Rome. The Pope lives in Rome. Italy is all going to be basically very, very, very Catholic. The church was a huge source of wealth for Italy. There's a lot of wealth in the church, which means that the more wealth you have, the easier it is to kind of keep control, I guess, if you will, over a particular region. The Italian Renaissance, which was largely linked to the Catholic Church, thanks to how much the Catholic Church was patronizing and commissioning all of this work. And then Germany had more liberal universities than did Italy or other places. Okay, so here's a couple of other review things down here for you on this thing. We talked about Council of Trent. We talked about the Society of Jesus, a.k.a. the Jesuits, founded by Loyola. The Spanish Inquisition, wars of religion, the German Peasants Revolt, small Caudic. Okay, we talked about that. St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. That's where we saw the murder. It's almost like the Godfather in a way. You have Henry III of France, you have Henry Duke of Guise, and then you have Henry of Navarre. That's the War of the Three Henrys. And then obviously the 30 Years' War is the last war of religion there in Europe. Okay. So anything else that I'm missing on this one? No, that's good there. A couple of last quick things for you. You want to probably look back over. Here's all the story about Henry VIII. You guys probably remember that one pretty well. Church of England, aka Anglican Church, breaks away from the Catholic Church. We talked about that. Thomas Cranmer. The Church of England, Catholic lands. About 25% of all land in England were confiscated by the Church of England. You see a couple of important things like the Act of Succession, which is established by Henry VIII, where all the king's subjects had to take an oath of loyalty to the king as the head of the Anglican Church. Henry ordered the execution of humanist writer Thomas More for refusing to take that oath. And let's see here. Henry's break from the church, despite how similar the Anglican Church remained to Catholicism. That's another thing to remember, is that of all of these of all of these Protestant faiths, the one that look most like Catholicism are going to be Lutheranism and the Anglican Church. Those ones, from the outside looking in, they look really, really, really Catholic. They're the least different from the Catholic Church. The further, more radical that you go to Calvinism, to even more radical to like the Anabaptists or the Quakers or something, they're going to look far, far, far more different from Catholicism than the Anglican Church does. The Anglican Church is about as Catholic as you can get without. It's like the thing that I said before, when they find when a Vaughn's grocery store shuts down and they take the V off and they put a J on it and call it John's grocery store now. That's basically what the Anglican Church is to the Catholic Church. And then Edward VI was the only son of Henry VIII. But remember that Edward VI doesn't last very long. And you have Mary, who is his older half-sister. Mary was the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, if you remember that. Catherine of Aragon and Henry VIII. Catherine of Aragon was his first wife. Remember, Catherine of Aragon was originally married to Henry's older brother, Arthur, who died within the first year of their marriage without, according to Catherine of Aragon, without them ever actually consummating the marriage. And she ends up, Mary, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon. Catherine of Aragon dies, but Mary becomes the Queen of England, and she had earlier married Philip II, because remember that Mary was supposed to be, she was supposed to be first in line. In her view, the whole reason that the whole reason that she exists is because her mother had been sent by Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile to England to marry and become the Queen of England, and for them to have children. And so Mary, when she gets into the position of queen, she views herself as it's like her God-given birthright mission to create this Spanish-English alliance. So she marries the King of Spain, Philip II, to secure the same type of alliance that England and Spain were supposed to have going back to old times. But of course it doesn't work out. She ends up becoming known as Bloody Mary because she ends up killing so many people due to the fact that she is trying to re-Catholicize England in a time where it was already largely broken away from the Catholic Church. So 300 people get executed, including bishops and even Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, who had assisted in helping secure the divorce between Catherine of Aragon and Henry establishing the Church of England. Mary I meets an untimely end due to stomach cancer, and her younger half-sister, Elizabeth, who was the daughter of Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn was the second wife. She was the one who was Elizabeth's a politique. You could say Anne Boleyn is very politically savvy herself, though. She's a smart woman, but she finds herself at the wrong end of a royal accusation of cheating on Henry VIII, and she gets beheaded as a result. But Elizabeth I became queen. Her daughter, Elizabeth I, is the longest reigning queen at that time. Victoria takes it over, and then more recently, Elizabeth II is now the longest reigning queen of all time of England. But in her time, Elizabeth I reigned for a very long time, from 1558 all the way up to 1603. She was called the Virgin Queen, in part because she never married or had kids. She's also the last Tudor monarch of England, and she's a politique. She was a practical and brilliant politician who carefully navigated a middle ground between Anglicanism and Protestantism, and in particular as a female monarch in a patriarchal system. So she's a great example of a politique because of some of the things that she did that allowed for a little bit of leeway, while at the same time making sure that Anglicanism prospered under her reign. Puritans, Calvinists, sought to reform the church, which she had to mitigate, as they were viewed by Anglicans as extremists. Remember, she's Anglican, like her father, Church of England. But you do start to see a growing number, especially in the noble population of England at this time, which is a small population, but the nobles are more vocal and more powerful and influential in English politics. And so when they start to convert to Puritanism, Calvinism, they're viewed by Anglicans as being really extremist. And so, she has to find a way to kind of tame them, while at the same time promoting Anglicanism and to some extent actually tolerating Catholicism. Not that she wants to come off too friendly to Catholics, but basically she comes up with this Book of Common Prayer, and she says, whatever you do in the closed doors of your own home is your own business. And that's kind of what this is, like right here, Elizabethan settlement. Elizabeth in Parliament required conformity to the Church of England, but people were in effect allowed to worship Protestantism and Catholicism privately in their own homes and so on. But if you were public, you better, at least in name, say that you're Anglican. Some church practices, including ritual, resembled Catholic practices. You had the Book of Common Prayer. Clergy was allowed to marry. Services were given in vernacular. They're very... these are very... Actually, it's very close to Lutheranism, to be honest with you. Like I said, Anglicanism and Lutheranism are as close to Catholicism as you can get. And of course, in the Catholic Church, the clergy are not allowed to marry. But it is very similar to the Lutheran Church, where clergy are allowed to marry. Catholicism remained very prominent in England, especially among the gentry, but it could not be practiced openly, especially in northern England. The further north in England that you went, the more likely it was that they were Catholic. Jumping down a little bit, Protestant women lost opportunities in the church that many Catholic women pursued, like, for example, becoming nuns and things. Women gradually even lost rights to manage their own property or make legal transactions in their own name. There are some practices that, like, for example, coverture is the name of a practice that you'll learn about, where literally when a woman got married to a man, she was now covered legally. Her identity was covered by her husband. All property rights that she had were covered by her husband. So coverture was a big part of this decline in women's ability to handle their own affairs. Here's the Ursuline nuns that we were talking about earlier. And then the French War, the Wars of Religion at this time. Defenestration of Prague is the incident that starts the 30 Years' War in 1618. And that's where they get thrown out the window. And depending on who you asked, Catholics, the Catholic officials that got thrown out the window, they say no one was killed, but the reason that Catholics didn't get killed when they were thrown out this window is because angels swooped down to save them, and then Protestants say no, the reason they weren't killed is because they all fell on a giant heap of dung and that broke their fall. So that's the Defenestration of Prague. They're here that you can see them actually in the background throwing these dudes out the window. It was pretty high up. It was a long fall. And the French Wars of Religion and the 30 Years' War, religious disagreements between Catholics and Protestants, basically religious pluralism, and then dynastic ambitions of princes in both French and Austrian monarchies. Remember that the Bourbons and the Habsburgs in France and Austria, respectively, did not ever get along with one another. And France, a lot of times, even though it's Catholic, will end up taking a side on, say, the Protestant side, even though they're Catholic, just to stick it to the Habsburgs. Francis I of France was the King of France during Henry VIII's time, and he and Henry VIII famously once had a wrestling match where Francis I beat Henry VIII of England, and Henry VIII spent the rest of the festival sulking and pouting about the fact that he lost. Catherine de' Medici, we talked about her. She was sometimes called the shopkeeper's daughter. Remember that she is not well liked by the French. She is the widow of Henry II, and she dominated the rule of her 3 sickly and incompetent sons. You do see 3 powerful noble families start to challenge the throne, and this is why we can call Catherine de' Medici a politique as well, is because she was able to pretty carefully navigate some murky waters there in the time when she was, basically running the show after her husband dies, Henry II. You have 3 powerful Catholic families, noble families at this time, the Catholic Guise family, the Catholic Montmorency family, and the Huguenot Bourbon family. And of course the Bourbon family is going to be the one that emerges victorious over these the War of the Three Henrys here. And this would be where Henry IV comes from. Henry of Navarre comes from the Bourbon family. Whoops. So Henry, Duke of Guise, you can read all about all this on your own. I'm not going to tell you the whole story of the War of the Three Henrys over again, but certainly you can read about it. St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre was in 1572. Before his sister's wedding, Charles IX was convinced by his mother, Catherine de' Medici, and the Catholic Guise advisors, to strike brutally against the Huguenots who show up to this wedding. And so on August 24th, early in the morning, Catholic assassins start to murder Huguenot leaders, including this guy Gaspard de Coligny. And for 6 days, Catholic mobs stormed the streets, killing up to 2,000 Protestants outside of Paris. Another 10,000 died. So it's quite a massacre of Huguenots. And then there's this struggle for power, and we could just go on and on about this. But long story short, Henry of Navarre ends up taking the throne, and there you can, as I said, you can read through all of this on your own or watch videos on it if you like, but I'm not going to tell that whole story right now. At the end of the so that was all the French wars of religion between the Huguenots and the Catholics. At the end of the 30 Years' War, we do see some redistricting of the Holy Roman Empire. And you can see here kind of the boundary of the Holy Roman Empire is right here at this time. And the 30 Years' War, we talked all about the 30 Years' War. You guys probably remember that. That was a really cool story where, if you remember the 30 Years' War, this is the one where Wallenstein, okay, so this all starts when there's this guy, Tilly. Okay, let's go back here a little bit. We talked about this in class. Just a quick reminder for the 30 Years' War and how this all happens. Ferdinand II, Holy Roman Emperor, I mentioned him earlier today. He tries to limit Protestant worship in Bohemia, which is where Prague is at that time. That's modern-day Czech Republic. That's when the Defenestration of Prague happens. Calvinists revolt against the Roman Catholic Church and Habsburg dynasty in Bohemia at that time. And their leader is a guy called Frederick. So don't get Ferd confused with Frederick. Frederick's the Protestant guy. Ferdinand is the Catholic guy. And Protestants and Catholics fight over Vienna, the Habsburg capital. France allies with Frederick's Protestant forces during this time, once again, because they just want to stick it to the Habsburgs. It has nothing to do with religion for the French. And the Catholic League forces, which came to try to save Ferdinand and the Vienna capital of the Habsburgs, were led by a guy called Johannes von Tilly, and he defeated the Protestant army in 1623. So Tilly is this kind of mastered military Catholic commander, and Frederick turns to Scandinavia for assistance because they're going to be Protestant. That's going to be places like Sweden, for example, or Denmark. And he hopes that they're going to help him in the name of the Protestant faith. So in 1625, Christian IV, who was a Protestant king of Denmark, agrees to assist and marched troops down into Germany. He was expecting help from England, France, and the Netherlands, the Dutch Republic, but he does not get it. And so this other guy, Albrecht von Wallenstein, he was a Bohemian noble and a Catholic convert. He was kind of more of a soldier of war guy, though. He's a mercenary for hire. And so he's not truly Catholic. He's more about making a name for himself. He was raised Lutheran, converts to Catholicism, and he marches north with 30,000 men. And Wallenstein ends up crushing the Danes. So now this is the second major Catholic victory. The first one under Tilly, the second one under Wallenstein. And then Ferdinand II, Holy Roman Emperor still, began taking new measures against Protestants in Bohemia, but he found it hard to enforce Catholic demands in German Protestant cities of the Hanseatic League. And so in 1629, there's this Edict of Restitution, which allowed Lutherans, but not Calvinists, to practice religion in certain cities. Nonetheless, the 30 Years' War wages on at this time. This is where we move into the Swedish phase of the war, where Gustavus Adolphus, who was the Lutheran king of Sweden, came in to assist the Protestant forces, and Frederick down in Bohemia. Sweden ends up marching south, subduing Catholic Poland with 70,000 men, and then a combined Habsburg-Polish force in 1629 as well. Okay, so he is having a lot of success marching down from Sweden, beating Catholics on two different occasions. Ferdinand II and the Catholic electors demanded Wallenstein's dismissal. They send Tilly to stop the Swedes, but Gustavus Adolphus has these forces, these Protestant forces that can't be beat allegedly, and he defeats the Catholic army and kills Tilly in Bavaria in 1632. So now Wallenstein's been fired. Okay, they've killed, the Protestants have killed Tilly. What are they going to do? Well, Ferdinand II reaches back out to Wallenstein, the soldier of fortune guy, to save the Catholic cause. Wallenstein reconquers Silesia and Bohemia. And now it's going to be a face-off against these two huge guys, right? Gustavus Adolphus of the Lutheran Swedish forces, Protestant forces, and then you have Wallenstein, who's the leader of the Catholic forces. But remember, Wallenstein was kind of a sitting the fence sort of a guy. He's not a super true Catholic. He's more of a soldier of fortune, wants to make a name for himself. They have a battle at the Battle of Lutzen, and overall this is a Catholic victory because Gustavus Adolphus falls dead in battle. Interesting twist to the story, though, at the end is when Wallenstein himself finds himself in hot water once again with the Holy Roman Emperor, who orders Wallenstein's assassination after realizing that after Wallenstein had been dismissed, during that period of time, he almost went and joined forces with Gustavus Adolphus, and that is what ultimately gets him assassinated at the end. So it's a really kind of poetic and amazing story that would make for a great movie. And here you can see some of the territorial changes to the boundary of the Holy Roman Empire after the 30 Years' War, where they completely redistrict and consolidate a number of different states. So now instead of being like over 1,000 different small bishoprics and principalities, it's only about 300 or so. So anyhow, that brings us to the end of the review lecture for this. Yes, that is a good answer, Renee. Nice job. So a politique is someone who politically savvy. Okay, so politically a politique, it has more to do with let me move this over here 1 second. A politique has more to do with the when you're talking politiques, you're mostly referring to the Protestant Reformation era, because you're talking about somebody who's really good at navigating the religious policies of that time. So navigating like the Protestant Catholic thing. Okay, that's usually what politiques refers to. Realpolitik has really not much to do with religion per se. Politiques are more informed by, like Renee said, Machiavellian type, like ruthless, cutthroat, duplicitous, two-faced politics to undermine, to wage war like a precision scalpel and take small territories away in very like defined defined methods. Okay, like very realpolitik is more of this like cutthroat politics where you're using really kind of like two-faced like ruthless cutthroat type policies to achieve your political means. So like guys like Bismarck is going to be a realpolitik, or Count Cavour from Italy is going to be a realpolitik. Those guys are, it's just more about it's more of a 19th century phrase than it is a Protestant Reformation phase. So that's going to be the difference between those two. All right. The assignment for today is going to be very similar to the one that was on Wednesday. Basically, I'm going to have you do those questions for yeah, there you go. Nice example, Renee. So I'm going to have you guys do the questions for just like last time, except for this time for Unit 2. So when you click on the, let me see if I can pull this up here really quick. You're going to go to AP Classroom, okay? And AP Classroom, let's pull up this link here so you can see it. We're going to courses, and then we're going to go to period 0 for right now, I guess. And then go to new. And then we're going to click on AP Classroom Practice Questions. And you remember, you may have to click again at the top there in order to open that page up on a new tab. And it'll probably ask you to log in if you haven't logged in yet. Man, I can't believe this rain. It has been so rainy last week. Really, the last like couple months it feels like. It's been very rainy. Do that, log in, see how this works. Okay, and once you click on, let's see here. Where do we go? I guess let's just click on AP Classroom. And then AP Euro. Yeah, click on AP Classroom, then AP Euro, and that is where you should see the questions available. So it will say Unit 2 Progress Check Multiple Choice. Let me open this in a new tab and see if I can copy this exact link. Let's do that. I'm going to change this over here. Let's do this. I think that this will work better. Hopefully it works better. I don't know if it'll work or not. Some of you have had success getting this. Let's do this. We'll sign this. Come on. My internet's just going super slow because I'm uploading my stream right now and it makes it really slow. Okay, so assigned or in progress. It looks like it's all good. Unlock the assessment now. Let me, assignment. Okay, so begins right now. That's fine. And then assignment due. We'll make this due Monday at 8 a.m. How about that? I'll give you some time to do it. Okay, so should be good now. Students see personal progress checks as locked. Oh, select a class. I'm just going to do this. View. Let's see if this works. Can you guys pull this up and see if you can do it? It says it's online and that it's unlocked. Are you able to do this right now or no? Assignment due date. Oh, interesting. Okay, we're going to go forward here. We're going to make this due the 13th at 8 a.m. Interessante. Okay. All right. Nice. Okay, now what we can do, we have to go to the other class though. So how do we get to the other one? This is such like a pain. This whole process is such a pain, but we're going to do this. We're going to go here. View progress. We're going to do it. This is like the worst layout of anything. Sravanti, is that working for you or what? Yeah, yesterday. It is unlocked. Okay. It's open for us. Okay, good. Nice. Excellent. And we're going to... I have to go to my other... Whoops, not that. Boy, I didn't want to do that. Okay, we want to go back. Okay, let's go to this one now. And we will make this so that it closes. Oops. I'm going to bring this forward to the 13th. This is so much harder than Schoology. Okay, 1 second. Update. Okay. And now we got to go back to here. And then we got to do this again. Let's see. Okay. Okay. Now we gotta do it for the last one. Okay, now we gotta go to next class. Okay, now we're good. View progress. Then we go to here, due date. Will be due on, once again, 13th. There's no way to like universally set the due date for all your classes. You have to go in and manually do this for all the classes, and it's just really cumbersome and dumb. Okay. All right. Very good. So that should be all set up for you guys. Questions before I go? You guys are all kind of talking there. Wow, Yoey Jow. You ran 2.3 miles and ate breakfast. Holy smokes. In the rain? That's quite an accomplishment right there. Well, folks, if you don't have any questions for me, you're obviously always welcome to. You're always welcome to send me a message, and I'll try and get back to you as quick as I can. This video will remain up for you if you want to go back and review anything. But thanks so much for tuning in this morning. I hope that this has been a helpful review for you guys for Protestant Reformation. Pretty important part of the class for the first part of the unit, but get those practice questions done and use those as a chance to review some of this stuff. Even though you're not going to be asked multiple choice questions, I still think that these questions are a good way of reviewing some of the content. And if you want, of course, you can look through online and see if you can find a practice DBQ or something like that. Maybe if you have one of those review books, you got some questions in those. Don't just feel like you should limit yourself to the things that I'm giving you. I'm just giving you stuff so that you have something. But you can really get creative with how you go about reviewing all this stuff. And there's plenty of stuff online. All you got to do is just search it up. Tons and tons of stuff. Joey, my quarantine has been my quarantine's been good. It's been a lot of alone time, obviously. I just live here alone with the cats, but they've been entertaining enough. And I'm overall, I'm good. I've been healthy and just kind of doing my thing over here. I'm really happy that I'm actually contributing again to society, because I've realized during this quarantine how much my job really gives me such a sense of self-worth. I just feel like kind of a bump on a log just sitting here doing nothing every day. So I'm really kind of happy to be working with you guys again. I enjoy what I do. So to me, it's not like I like it. I like talking about this stuff, and I like interacting with you guys. So I miss work, to be honest. I really wish that we were still in school. So, kids, well, I guess I will let you guys go here, but enjoy the rest of your Friday, and as always, make good decisions. Bye.